And welcome back in to another new episode of Tribal Council Chat. As always, we are your hosts. My name is Bruce Heller,
My name's Britt Parnell.
and let's dive in. So, we have a super fun episode for you guys today. We've done a few season recap videos. Most recently, we did the Gabon video that we talked about doing forever before we actually did it. Last summer, we did an All-Stars episode, which we've just continued to reference that season an ungodly amount of times, but that's kind of a shtick around here now, so I don't see that stopping anytime soon. And we sort of did a China recap when we had Todd on, but that wasn't entirely season recap. That was also just talking to Todd. So,
And I mean, you say that that's not gonna end. We looking at the cast that we have for a recap tonight, it probably will continue pretty soon.
oh, no, the All-Stars references are going to go nuts tonight because this is an episode about Survivor the Australian Outback. And if you're watching on YouTube, I've got my Australian Outback t-shirt on that I bought around Christmas time last year off of eBay. So, yeah, so we're going to come at this a couple different ways. We're going to talk about kind of the stars of the season, people that were returnees. We're going to talk about other cast members that don't get talked about as much. The location itself, because we got a lot of really cool location moments this season. And then finish out with moments and storylines. So where do you want to start out with talking about kind of the stars of the season and the people that got a lot of airtime?
People that got a lot of airtime, I guess, we'll go into a couple after across the tribal divide, but I guess we really gotta go to half of Ogakor.
Yeah, for sure.
And
And
which player do you think we should get into first?
let's go with the winner. Let's go with Tina.
Great choice.
So and partially it's because last Saturday night I was doing a lot of driving and I was listening to Tina was on Talking with T-Bird recently, and I just love Tina. She seems like such a sweet person. Very smart, strategic game. Her and Colby are a great duo. I love the fact that when she wins, Colby stands up clapping and is super excited for her, even though he just lost. They're a great duo. Just Tina's game is interesting though, because it's not super obvious. Colby's game was very flashy with 4 or 5 immunity wins all in a row down the stretch, and
A couple of big blindsides too that really, when you think about it, Tina might have line, even though it looked like it was Colby's game in a more flashy way.
yeah, Colby was the flashy one everyone was talking about, and we'll get into Colby too. But with Tina, she was probably kind of the one pulling the strings, but doing it quieter, and she was able to stay under the radar the whole time in a way that Colby wasn't, and which caused
That
Colby
she
to
was
receive
able to
most of
do
the time.
that, pull the strings, but keep her relationships better is probably why once the decision's made to bring her to the end, which I'm sure we'll get into because that's probably the defining moment of this season. But once that decision's made, that's where she wins the game.
Yeah, for sure. And she's great at relationship building.
As aggressively as Colby did, she had just as much of a unclean game, at least for season 2, as Colby did, but people didn't see it the same.
Yeah, and Colby might have been the original meat shield in a way now that we're talking
That's
about
a
this.
great point.
Jeremy Collins gets credit for kind of creating and using the strategy of keeping the big targets around his shield so that you don't get talked about. But now that I'm thinking about it, Colby was a shield for Tina. He got a lot of the attention and got a few votes in a way that Tina really never did. She flew under the radar because of her partnership with him, and that was brilliant. And just, I guess we'll talk about Colby and Tina at the same time because we kind of already have. Personality wise, I just love these two. They seem like great people to hang out with. Colby's got some insanely entertaining quotes, and we'll probably get into some of these again when we talk about moments and storylines, but the I ain't no Hershey bar quote is funny. You've got I thank God every day that I'm a Texan. It's Colby's a quote machine. He seems like such a nice guy this season, and Tina just could not seem like a sweeter person, both watching her interact with other people and in confessionals. I love these two.
You say that, Bruce, because that's really, I guess, the difference between the one thing we have to look at when we talk about a season like Australia. I know you and I in a second or third episode talked about Borneo. Is the game is so different now that when you say these two are such sweet people to be around and would be really nice to socialize with, that's really what these old Jerrys were looking for
Yeah, for
in
sure.
the winner.
It's
And it's not so much, well, hasn't been that way since the late 20s, with a few exceptions popping up, but now there's so much focus on what did you do in this game as opposed to who do we want to represent our season.
I would argue that it still is that same way though. Survivor is very relational. It's the reason Hans lost twice because he wasn't able to socialize with people very well.
But I guess that's
It's
taking it to the complete opposite side of the spectrum from Tina, in that Hans didn't lose because he was managed the way Tina played poorly. He lost because he just acted like a complete dick to everybody.
yeah, and I would argue that that same thing of jury's vote based off of how you make them feel that we saw in season 2, that we saw in 19 and 20 with Hans. We just saw it again. That's why Kenzie won. Because she's very kind and very social and very personable. And your favorite winner, Michelle, a lot of her strategy is relational and how you make the jurors feel. That's always been like that, I feel like.
Definitely still part of the game.
It's and we I do feel like what's changed since the early days is seasons like Australian Outback, Africa, probably more cases too. That those early seasons, excuse me, were very big on honor in a way that you just don't see anymore. People don't take things near as personally as they used to.
Exactly. And I guess that's the point I was trying to make.
Okay. I wasn't sure what the point you were trying to make was. I was sure I was
Probably not.
probably misreading it, and I was. But I mean, you look
I
at
guess kind of I'm gonna get into that reference again that we didn't want to make, but I mean, I look at this season and it's like we talked about with Steven, the way people reacted to Jerri and what did she do?
yeah, exactly.
That's more of where I was going.
And I would say, and I'm gonna play a little game here and start tallying the marks this season comes up in conversation on this episode. But like on All Stars, well, that pen on All Stars, the Lex and Rob thing. If Rob does that same thing now, it's not the story it was back then. Because honor and loyalty were such a thing back then, and nowadays people realize it's a game. Like we can be friends outside of the show. And I've heard Lex did Talking with T-Bird a few years ago, and I went back and listened to that again recently. And like at the time, Rob was 25, 24, I think, and Lex was 40 something. So, like, I'm sure they've both moved on by now already, but it was, it just, that wouldn't happen. Now, it's Lex. So if you take that version of Lex, it might still, because Lex just plays the game in a really personal way. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I don't feel like that happens now, where, like, if either Colby or Tina had blindsided the other one, or if Colby had chosen Keith, I mean, maybe that cost him Tina's vote. Who knows? I don't think it would have, but the way
I don't
everything
think
was
so.
so personal back then, I wouldn't put it past anyone.
That's true. It was almost like the players of the game when the players in the first few seasons were really deciding how Survivor was going to be played. Different parts of the game were interpreted very differently than they have been in more recent times.
Yeah, for sure. And so, kind of getting back to the cast, we talked a lot about Tina and Colby, who are two icons of not only early Survivor, but Survivor as a whole. They still, the two of them get talked about. We talked about them on our duos episode. Let's move over to the other side of Ogakor, to someone that was kind of a heel and a rival to both Colby and to Tina separately. Although, fun fact, on the most recent Talking with T-Bird that Tina was on, Tina said her and this person are actually, like, pretty good friends now and are in a great spot now compared to the bit of rivalry they had on the show. And that's Jerri Manthe, who kind of had a rivalry with Tina, kind of wanted to work with Colby early on, and then had this rivalry slash crush thing with Colby for most of the season. That was a super weird dynamic, but from her perspective, but from his perspective, it was very clear she annoys me. So
That's another interesting thing when we talk about these, like the first 5 seasons or so, is there was so much more of an emphasis placed on which castaway is just you don't want to live with anymore, as opposed to who you think you can beat and getting really into the ends of the game. Maybe with that popping up a couple of more times in the future, notably Abby.
yeah, true. And we see it. I don't really remember if we had that person on All Stars. Not All Stars, Borneo. I'm not counting that as a reference because it was accidental. But like, we had Jerri on All Stars that just annoyed people for some reason. And by the way, people call Jerri the original villainess. She really, like, her game wasn't villain at all. I think she just has that title because she annoyed people. But you have Jerri. Africa, you had Samburu was interesting because half the tribe didn't want to be around Brandon and the other half didn't want to be around Frank. So you kind of had two of those that were risks of getting voted out because they annoyed people. And the two of them obviously couldn't stand each other, which was hilarious because the two of them ended up going on a reward together. So
It was funny.
they had like the movie night reward too. It was great. Which I think of Rob and Amber anytime I think of the movie night reward. So that just always feels like a date night type of reward because of that. But yeah, you definitely had that person on a lot of seasons. You had it in more New School Survivor with Abby, like you said. I would argue we kind of had that in my favorite New Era season in 45 with Bruce a little bit. Not to the extent that you had it with Abby or with Jerri, but
Yeah, there was a few times where other contestants were talking about voting out Bruce just because of the way he was at camp.
well, until the like until the like second to last episode, or whenever she started talking about how she got out of a cult, Katura's entire arc as a player was I want Bruce out. That's the only content we gave. We saw some of it from Caleb too, and I think he just kind of started to wear on people overall. I'm still glad he
Back to
got to come
Jerri.
back and play again, but I don't think. Yeah, I think he rode people the wrong way for sure.
Either way, back to Jerri before we get too lost.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get sidetracked throughout the episode. I've already accepted that. But yeah, Jerri's interesting because she gets a lot of hate early on. Not hate, but a lot of shade, I guess. People called her the original villainess. Her game really wasn't villainous. She didn't lie. She didn't blindside. She was very upfront, maybe even too upfront sometimes about what she was doing, who she didn't like, and
Part of that is just that there's a cultural difference both in the United States and in Canada between 2000 and 2024.
fair enough.
And some of the things Jerri said today would be completely normal for someone to express on TV because they're normal human emotions. But back then, maybe wasn't something that people talked about.
Yeah, and does do I think Jerri probably got too much shade back then? Yeah, probably. If I was out in the Outback as a member of Ogakor or Barramundi, would she have gotten on my nerves? Yeah, probably. Like, both things can be true, but either way, Jerri's an iconic character of early Survivor. And she comes back 2 more times in All Stars and in Heroes versus Villains. Heroes versus Villains, she's playing with Hans, so she's not the one everyone dislikes and gets annoyed by. She's actually someone people want to play with, which I think is mostly her growing as a person and a player, but also playing next to Russell Hans kind of makes you more likable by default.
And like I was just saying, people have changed, our culture has changed. And at the point that she comes in into 20, Jerri's a legend of this game. And people want to play with her.
Yeah. Whereas when you come into All Stars 6 seasons later, she's still kind of the one that annoys people. And when Ethan is begging Lex to keep him, and Ethan says she doesn't deserve to be here, and Lex says it's just business. This game isn't personal. It then becomes personal a few episodes later, but we don't see the transformation there. But sorry, I need to quit taking shots at him for that. But so easy. But like,
Yeah.
it's interesting to see. We didn't get a ton of like growth as a player. From 2 to 8, we kind of got the same character a little bit. We saw more of her. Well, I guess she was around less episodes, but we saw a really cool dynamic between her and Lex as each other's number ones. But from 8 to 20, she grows a lot, and she's gone from kind of being the one that people like, even Ethan, say she doesn't deserve to be here, to in 20, where she goes home at 4, but if she gets past that vote and makes it to 3, she beats any of the final 3 in that jury vote, I'm pretty sure, because she was on the villains tribe, and the jury full of heroes was very anti-villain, but Jerri was the likable one on that tribe.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get over to Kucha for a bit since we've talked about Ogakor so much. And I want to go into, I guess, 2 more players that people really loved at this point, and they're such a duo that I have to bring them up together, and that's Roger and Elisabeth.
Yes, I love the two of them. I by my bed, which my recording space is kind of at the end of my bed, but up by where my head is on my pillow, I have a bunch of like pictures of Survivor scenes on the wall, and one of them is a picture of the two of them. I'll be right back. But I love the two of them. They are great. I love their kind of father-daughter dynamic.
Yeah.
And so I will be right back if you want to keep talking. Here it is.
See,
So love the two of them. Love their dynamic and how much they kind of relied on each other and learned from each other. And so, and she's my favorite. Elisabeth is my favorite of the season. She just, I mean, she was kind of cast as that girl next door archetype, but she seems so nice, so kind, so genuine, and I love watching her play the game. I think if Kucha had
I love
had
how.
what
What? No, go ahead.
if Kucha had been able to get majority at the merge and send an Ogakor home instead of Varner getting sent home on the tiebreaker,
Yeah.
which now that time has passed, I'm glad Varner went home. But I think if Kucha had been able to get merge numbers, Elisabeth would have had a really good shot at winning. Because, like we talked about, Survivor is very relational. She was on good terms with everyone.
Oh, she absolutely would have had a good shot. I think the two of them have a great shot to go to the final two. The only way I think that they don't potentially go to the final two is if there's someone in that Kucha group, like a Nick Brown or Jeff Varner, that maybe becomes that Boston Rob or Rob Sesternino a few seasons earlier and starts playing a more aggressive game,
Yeah,
knowing how big of a threat the two of them would have been.
yeah, I could see that a little bit, but
I love with these two. What I was going to say is the relationship and how much, not only how it developed, but how quickly they bonded, seeing that they're from completely different age groups at this time. And like, I love that challenge that I'm sure we all remember when the tribes had to jump off an 8-meter cliff into the Herbert River in Australia.
oh yeah,
And you see Elisabeth both convincing Roger that he can do it, but then helping him with the swim after, despite the fact that he's never really swam in his life on day 4.
yeah,
They've
that's
known each other at
fantastic.
this point. At least they've been able to talk to each other for less than 3 days.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I love that scene. It's it really is kind of the first. We've seen this a few times throughout Survivor, where there's this kind of this older and younger aged pairing, where it's kind of this parent kid dynamic, and this was the first version of that we saw.
We've seen it quite a few times, even up to the most recent season, except
Yeah,
it maybe fell apart right at the end.
I mean, just a couple seasons later in Marquesas, we see Pascal and Nalia, which is basically Elisabeth and Roger, but from a different universe.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, and I love that pairing also. But this was the original, and I love this season. So this is the version of that dynamic that always is the favorite in
About
my head.
that jumping on a cliff challenge, I'm just going back because I haven't watched it in a while. But what do you think? Should we say that's the best tribal reward challenge they've ever done?
It's got to be up there for sure. So let me see. Let me look at the rest of Roger and Elisabeth were the higher ranking members of Kucha. Someone from Kucha that didn't last very long, but I feel like has iconic enough of a scene to talk about her in the Stars of the Season episode. Kimmy Kappenberg was on Kucha.
That's a good point. And she's someone who goes all the way to the end of the game 29 seasons later in Cambodia.
Yeah, that's wild. But
It was great in that with that fan vote to see like Kimmy, Wigglesworth, Andrew Savage all come back and not just be players from right around the same era.
Wish I wasn't part of the Survivor community yet at the time, but all the people that did vote, I wish you guys would have gotten T-Bird on this season. I wish you guys would have done that.
I was part of the community at that point, and I was one of those people voting every day. And only a few of my players that I was voting for actually got on. So many names I voted for didn't get on. T-Bird was one of them. Um, I could go into a few names if I pulled up the list again, but yeah, I absolutely wish that she would have been there. It's unfortunate we never got to see T-Bird again, because who knew that after that cast, well, I guess Game Changers, but that came so soon after, and how many of those people were actually game changers. But really, we didn't get another returning player season because we went to Winners at War, which limited you to being one of 38 people, and they were going to pick 20 of them to be there. And then now we're in the new era.
Probst, put T-Bird on 50. That is my request of you. I don't feel like it's impossible. He did say that 50 won't be limited to only 41 and forward.
It's absolutely possible, and I hope it happens.
And based on just hearing her talk on her and Sister Nino's podcast, I feel like there's a very high chance she would want to go back also.
Yeah.
So
it'd be an interesting one too. What if they put on 50? T-Bird on one tribe, Rob on one tribe, and Fishback on one tribe.
Well, yeah, because those three, because of talking with T-Bird, because of know-it-alls, because Rob runs an entire giant network, have so many connections with so many different players. They've already done their pre-gaming through their podcast. Those people are set up to win if you go in there.
And so many different other reality shows too, because the name Rob Cesternino, I know Michelle mentioned him, but I think that a couple other contestants mentioned him at Challenge Mania this week.
Oh wow. Well, yeah, because he's a Survivor player, but as a podcaster, the network he runs, RHAP, covers so many different. I can't even tell you all the different shows they cover. Yeah. And from what I understand, he hops on and can discuss any of them. So yeah, I'm sure he's gotten to know a lot of people, but he is Survivor first and foremost. That's his background. So if him or T-Bird or Fishback get on 50, they're set up, dude. They know so many people thanks to RHAP. And I hope they do get on. I love all three of those people. But
that would be amazing.
Going back a little bit with Kimmy, we talked about Jerri kind of being that person for Ogakor and for the Merge Tribe Barramundi of, we want to vote this person out because we just don't enjoy having them around camp. Kimmy was what that was for Kucha. Yeah. They just went to Tribal a lot more during the pre-merge, so they sent her home. And then Alicia wagged her finger in her face and always will right before. I think that was the same episode that Kimmy goes home. If it wasn't, it was one of the next couple. We will get into that fight and moments and storylines though, because I still just watch that clip sometimes and chuckle at the quotes Kimmy and Alicia threw back at each other. And so there's only so much airtime. There's not a ton of people that would classify as stars of the season. But while we're talking about cast, let's kind of move into some of the people that were memorable cast members worth talking about, but weren't necessarily stars of this season. And since we just talked about Kimmy, I'll start with someone that she comes back for a second season, and on All Stars, she is one of the stars of the season, and is one of the jurors that was not one of the most bitter jurors with Rob because she wasn't Lex or Tom, but not very happy with Rob for the way she was voted out, and that is Alicia Calloway. And that was her All Stars game, which is kind of our forte, but she plays a really interesting game here on Australian Outback also.
Let's play an interesting game. Definitely one who wasn't afraid, as we saw with Kimmy, to let her opinions be known, and I love that. This got me thinking because I just mentioned Challenge Mania. She would have been amazing for that show if they were casting Survivor players way back in like Challenge 2, 3, 4.
I'm kind of surprised she wasn't more of a challenge beast, and maybe this is just because
Yeah,
she went home too early to be.
I
But
think
just
so.
both of her
She
seasons,
was a challenge beast in that first individual challenge that she did, where they were standing on a pole all night and Jeff's bringing out fire in order to shoot in the dark. But then she goes home in the next episode.
yeah. But just look at pictures of her from both of her seasons. Like, she's ripped. Super muscular person, great shape. So, and we kind of see it more with her second season when she makes it down to like fifth place, I want to say. No, Tom was fifth. Sixth place.
She was seventh.
Seventh. Oh, okay. They did cut
It's
her
Tom,
earlier.
then Sheehan, then her.
Sheehan did win immunity that time. I forgot about that. Because it was absolutely going to be Sheehan. She was the last Mogo Mogo left. She won immunity, and Alicia went home. But we did see Alicia excel both in camp and in challenges in the physical game when she was kept around longer and wasn't on a tribe that didn't have merge numbers and on a season where, I mean, those first couple seasons and kind of Africa too, the tribe that got merge numbers steamrolled. They all stayed together until they were the only ones left, essentially. Now, like, it wasn't perfect, like the way Taki did to Pagong, because we do see Ogakor take Jerri out and Amber out before the last two Kuchas. But I mean, no one
Make sure they always had the numbers.
once Jeff Varner gets voted out on a tiebreaker at the merge, I don't feel like anyone from Kucha had a shot at winning at that point, unless immunity runs.
Yeah.
Roger or Elisabeth could have clutched out some immunities in the end there, but other than that, like I don't feel like Kucha really ever had a shot at winning after the merge. And so earlier we talked about Ogikor. We had the Colby and Jerri duo, as well as Colby and Tina duo, and we talked about how Jerri was a bit of a rival to both of them. Jerri had her own duo over on that tribe also, and that was Amber. And the two of them, we didn't. Amber wasn't a star on this season the way Jerri was, but we definitely saw a dynamic that Amber and Jerri were like this.
Absolutely. We see that in the breakfast award that Jerri wins when the two of them go to the first individual award of the season together, and really a duo. We see that in Jerri's comments that she then instantly regrets at tribal council when Jerri's asked who her closest allies are, and she instantly says Amber, Colby, and Mitchell, only to lead to actually Colby isn't your number one ally. And I really want to talk about that tribal council tonight
Yeah, for
because
sure.
that is really a game changing tribal council from a production angle. And I'll get into more of what I mean. Um, yeah, that's definitely probably our first female duo that actually sticks together and goes on and is forms a good relationship moving out of the game, as we see the Kelly Sue one break apart pretty quickly after it's formed.
Yeah, for sure. And so the cool thing about Survivor is you can have someone like Amber who, based on this season alone, I don't think a lot of people would have said, hey, it's a good idea to bring her back. But Probst and casting saw either they saw something in her or their first choices said no, because she gets brought back. And in that second chance, Amber runs with it. She not only wins, but has the best showmance in the history of the show. And I would call Amber a Survivor legend at this point, which is just funny to say, because if you just take her on this season on Australian Outback, you probably wouldn't even think to bring her back. But look what happens when you take a deeper look.
And from what I've heard, and I don't know how accurate this is, I don't have any insight into casting, but there was even some players who declined that they looked at before Amber, such as um, Sandra or Heidi, and then eventually settled on her based on players that are a little more recent to All Stars deciding not to come back onto that season.
Yeah, from what I've heard, Sandra was supposed to go and then had some sort of parasite or something from Pearl Islands and couldn't get cleared medically. Heidi, I hadn't heard, but that doesn't surprise me because from what I understand,
I heard something that Jenna did. Jenna talked about it, but it seemed that they were almost like interviewing them in groups from their own season, and that's more of the sense I get. Because like I remember Jenna Muraska saying that she, Heidi, and Sesternino all went to casting for All Stars together, and I think I've heard the same thing about like Rupert, Sandra, and Fairplay.
that's really interesting. So
Probably Hatch, Rudy, and Sue doing the same thing. And then the numbers just didn't work out, so they added Jenna Lewis, added Amber.
yeah, it's interesting though because, and again, we're getting sidetracked. We've already done an All Stars episode, but Pearl Island's only got one person. For as great of a cast and as many great characters were on that cast, they only got one person on there.
Yeah. Which
But
surprises me because even if Sandra wasn't well, I mean, how did Fairplay not get onto the final cast if he wanted to go?
I'm pretty sure Jeff doesn't like fair play just based on watching interactions between them,
Yeah, I know.
which is understandable. He's a very strong flavor, but it's I I like Amber this season. We don't see a ton of Amber. We kind of just they present her to us as Jerry's sidekick. We see a lot more of Jerri, but Amber does seem like trying to think of how to describe this. She seems like she knows what's going on, like she can read the game a little bit. Probably better than Jerri could, because like you said, Jerri said it
Absolutely.
tribal and said Colby's one of my top allies when he was actively working against her.
Yeah.
But the edit was very Jerri heavy, and I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of Amber on Australian Outback.
As well.
But yeah, so I'm looking at the cast right now. By the way, because we're talking about All Stars and returning players, Australian Outback holds the record for most returning players on one newbie season with 8. You've got, I'm going to see if I can do this off the top of my head. I have not looked at this at all. I just know the number. Jerri, Amber, Tina, Colby, Varner, Kimmy, he who shall not be named, and Alicia.
Yeah, that's right.
I figured I could. I just had to think about it for a second. But out of 18 people on All Stars, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them were all from Australian Outback, and they spread it out. But it's
Elisabeth isn't doing the view. There's no question that she would have been back at least a couple of times.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me because I don't. If they were to do that a returning player season now, I don't think you'd see that many players returning from one season all on a season together like that. I guess with heroes versus villains, they did it with Micro, but all the returners from Micro were returners on Micro. None of them were newbies together. So I don't know if it qualifies as the same thing or not.
You're right.
But the feat that casting pulled off with this season, and part of what makes this season so great, is look how great this cast is. Look, 8 people out of 16 were brought. Half the cast returned. I'm pretty sure we have some seasons where nobody returned.
Yeah.
I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I guarantee you there's one if I thought about it. Well,
anything since David versus Goliath. Oh no, we had Winners at War. Anything since Edge of Extinction to the present.
yeah. Trying to think if there's an older one. I don't think there is. Oh well. That'll be trivia for later.
Yeah.
But before we move into setting an environment, whoa, it's raining really hard all of a sudden. Nice. I can hear it hitting the roof. But
it's actually hilarious that you say that because I'm in the middle of a torrential downpour right now, and we live like a good 1,000 miles apart.
yeah, but hopefully you're coming down here next hockey season. But this has, and I'm gonna say for a newbie season, because if you don't put that qualifier on there, everyone's gonna point at heroes versus villains. But for an all newbie season, this has to be the best cast they've done for all newbies. Just half the cast was good enough to return. And like you said, if it wasn't for the view and all the stuff she was doing, Elisabeth probably comes back also at some point.
If Roger was a bit younger, he probably comes back.
Yeah. Well, they brought Rudy back. They could have brought Roger back.
Oh, they could have.
But
I just mean later in the franchise.
yeah. But so we've talked about the cast a good lot now. Moving into the location. Excuse me. This was such a cool spot though, because we're so used to seeing teams on these tropical beaches. And I mean we're stuck in Fiji all the time now, but back then we had Borneo, we had Marquesas, we had the Amazon, where Amazon was kind of in a rainforest also, but we had all these seasons with beaches.
Little Islands, Vanuatu.
And yeah. So and Africa was like this too. These 2 seasons here where it's in a more unconventional location. By the way, my mom texted me a quote because they just got home that Amber was an observer and Jerri was more of an instigator, and that was kind of their dynamic, which I feel like is smart. Because if the 2 of them if by some miracle the 2 of them are the final 2, Amber gets most of the votes. Yeah. If not all of the votes.
Yeah.
But going back to what I was saying, being in the Australian Outback on a riverbed was really a cool setting, and I liked it. The dried out riverbed turned out to not be the best place to set your camp up when it flooded during a challenge.
I was gonna say I like that too, this setting too. And the thing that makes it one of the best locations that they've really ever used is that in this season everything happens. You have floods, you have forest fires, you have huge storms, you have a guy pass out in the fire, you have a guy win 5 immunities.
Yeah. Also, I just like to say, between season 2, season 3, and season 6, we had river flood, refill a dried riverbed, and destroy the camp. we had lions roaming outside the camp while we're trying to sleep, and we had someone build up such a large pile of firewood that it burned the camp down while they were away because the extra wood pile was too close to the fire.
Yeah.
Like, what was with nature during the first 6 seasons?
You could
And,
say
and
what was with
Borneo, we
nature,
had
or like,
Borneo, we ran into Komodo dragons that ate our chickens we'd won at some point, I'm pretty sure.
yeah. Or I could play devil's advocate on that and say, what's with the stupidity of the players?
Okay, the Lions one wasn't the player's fault.
That was not. That was just Africa.
That was
Those
cool though.
lions in those
I
lions
would
in
be
Kenya.
I'd be freaked out in the moment, but part of me would be like, "Hey, cool, there's a lion right over there. I wish it wasn't dark outside."
Yeah, it's my like, as the audience knows, I'm someone who loves traveling, and camping in Botswana is like in the top 5 things on my bucket list to do. So I
Yeah.
would love to be able to experience that.
Yeah, it'd probably be terrifying in like when you're there and because the camp in Africa was surrounded by this like bushy type thing that the animals wouldn't enter. But to hear the lion like prowling around right outside of that would be really terrifying, but also really cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, like we said on our locations episode, Survivor Africa is our favorite location season. But also with Australian Outback, like you said, it's not just the river flood, it's right across the river or pond or whatever the water by their camp was. It wasn't moving. I don't think it was river. That there are the forest fires coming in and inching closer, and you've got he who shall not be named catches a pig with a spear he made by putting a knife on the end of a stick. It's just such a fun location, and I like tropical beaches, but we've done enough of those. Fiji issue aside, we've done a lot of beaches. We can go other places. So that was, I think we touched on the location about all we can. Do you have anything else before we move into just spitballing on moments and storylines?
I think we covered what I wanted to say there.
And so, because you already mentioned it and you wanted to talk about it, let's talk about that Jerri tribal council with Ogakor.
So here's why I say it's game changing in that I don't have you do you know what I'm about to say
Maybe?
on the production side?
I think so.
So when players vote prior to this tribal council, they voted just as you would like vote in an election, with everybody else's poachment still in the voting room.
I have read this, but keep
And
going.
after this tribal council, Mitchell goes up to vote. Mitchell is the person voting after Colby and saw his own name on Colby's parchment and knew instantly that his alliance was not really going to hold up and that Colby just blindsided him. And ever since then, in Survivor, production will remove a vote from the urn before the next person goes to vote.
Yeah, I have read that actually. That is interesting.
I found was really interesting too because it was like, especially coming right after that Jerri quote of Jerri saying that Mitchell, Amber, and Colby are her 3 closest allies, which one instantly alienates Tina and Keith. Not like they expected they were Jerri's closest allies, but it still isn't a smart political decision, knowing that Jerri doesn't get voted out that night, and neither do that Tina or Keith. So they have to go back to camp with her and continue playing the game. But that also it that the this it was clear exactly where the alliance broke, and therefore can alter the game, as Amber knows that no one can be trusted, and that her and Jerri are basically on an island on their own.
Yeah.
Or should I say in the outback on their own?
I think her saying like that basically everyone left that wasn't Tina and Keith was her ally wasn't a smart decision, but at the same time, she didn't say anything that everyone sitting there didn't already know. I don't feel like that really changed anything dynamics wise. She didn't like the two of them and they didn't really like her. So,
Yeah.
something else that's cool, and there's a lot of these little moments here and there that we'll go through real quick, but Australian Outback gave us the first Survivor auction.
They do.
And we talked about this a little bit with our auction series. There was a 2-episode series, History of the Auction. Go back and listen to those if you haven't. Those were really fun for me and Brett to do. But the first auction saw Australian Outback, and we talked about we didn't get a ton of Amber moments or Amber scenes. We get one with the auction. She gets the first covered item, bids a ton. I don't remember how much money on it, but bids a decent amount of money on it. Covered item, and this is why I don't, unless it's like Palau where they're all covered. I wouldn't bid on a covered item
I agree.
because she bids on it and Jeff uncovers it and river water. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
She still drank it though. I'm pretty sure, didn't she?
No, I think she just dumped it out. It's probably not boiled.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about that. Never mind. But funny moment there. There's a few great moments from that first auction. There's a Dorito somewhere in there, or a bowl of Doritos.
Tina clearly talked to production about how much she loved Doritos and therefore spent $60 on 3 chips. That was great.
Survivor inflation is such a thing with the auction,
Yeah.
especially with the 45 auction, with the rule he added in there where people just started throwing insane amounts of money out.
Yeah.
But Tina wins a bowl, not even a bowl, 3 Dorito chips. Somebody wins some Mountain Dew, from what I remember. It was the first auction, and it was a fun one. Going back a little bit,
6 French fries as opposed to even like a basket of French fries.
it's such weird amounts, and that kind of changes over time with the auction. But another moment that comes to my mind is one we touched on earlier is the Alicia Kimmy fight,
Yeah.
where and we basically have this argument in some sense every time chickens are a reward. But this was the original version of Kimmy was the I don't believe in killing the chickens. Can we not eat them? And Alicia just has no sense of subtlety or, for
It's
lack of a
almost
better
as
word,
if
trying to play nice.
I don't know, maybe I should try this casting tip, pretend to be a vegan because one of them gets on every season with chickens.
Why are they always on the season that has the chickens reward too? Because the chicken reward doesn't always happen every time.
You're right.
But it's a great back and forth between them. And I think the funniest exchange to me is Kimmy saying, "Don't wag your finger in my face." To which Alicia responds, "I will always wag my finger in your face." Like, that's a good comeback, I guess. But
Yeah.
uh, there is this one's more of just a funny moment. We were talking about Colby being very quotable earlier. There's the scene at Ogakor where I'm trying to think of how to describe Amber and Jerri in this scene. They're kind of just fantasizing, I guess. And it's about guys, but they're saying chocolate to kind of cover it, I guess. And you have a confessional of Colby saying, "I'm a lot of things, but I ain't no Hershey bar."
It's hilarious.
It's This whole season is just the fact that we can rattle off so many of these moments like this off the top of our head are part of what make this such a great and iconic season. Because we're forgetting
The
things
cast
too.
was so good.
There's things we haven't mentioned yet. We don't need to talk about it a ton because of who it is, but we can't not mention someone falling into a fire and having the skin on their hands become candle wax, essentially.
That was scary at the time, not so much when you rewatch it.
Well, yeah. Imagine his tribe mates though, watching him get helicoptered out. I even rewatching, I don't necessarily feel bad for him, but I feel bad for them. Especially because like Elisabeth, who we talked about, was very much kind of this girl next door archetype, very young, not a ton of life experience. She seemed super freaked out by it, and I don't blame her. And that was kind of another one of those Roger Elisabeth moments we talked about earlier, where he was comforting her, like how she did with him for the cliff diving.
Are you talking about another word that's in my mind now?
Yeah,
Well, one, we have the color award in this season, but Colby getting the color award and not realizing that it's also a family visit.
Colby and family visits are a great combination because you've got when he doesn't even realize it's a family visit. Then you've got 20 where it's one where the family members are competing in the challenge with them and he's yelling at his brother for him not doing well in the challenge. Dang it, Reed.
That was great.
But yeah, he car reward, but also family visit, and he doesn't even realize it's the family visit at first somehow, which is just kind of on brand for him, but still hysterical. There was another. Was Australian Outback the first time we had a tie vote?
Vote in as a whole, I think so.
Because the merge vote, due to he who shall not be named having his incident with the fire, the merge vote was
Yeah, it is the
tied
first
in
time
numbers.
because in Borneo,
That's a good point.
Augie was playing strategy and playing politically, whereas Pagong was just throwing votes at whoever that they thought they felt like it and saying let's just see what happens. So it ended up being 5-1-1-1-1-1.
Hold on. One of them. Well, never mind. He was on Toggy. I was going to say one of them had strategy. It wasn't just random votes. One of them was what letter in the alphabet am I on? But
Yeah.
Mom made a good point. She popped her head back in my door like she's done once already. We haven't talked about beef jerky yet, which I don't know how that slipped both of our minds, but
Yeah. Fun story about that incident. Hal is the first dual citizen to play Survivor,
interesting.
and he served in the U.S. Army in Texas, but he was born in a place where my grandma is born, called St. John, New Brunswick.
Oh, that's really cool. Now, something
Yeah.
else from this Tina episode of Talking with T-Bird recently is, to my knowledge, we've never gotten an actual answer to the beef jerky or not. But Tina did mention, and I don't know if you've heard this or not, that like Kel had gotten in trouble before they left for like trying to hide things.
Yeah, I think I
Because
heard that.
he had
He
been
was
in
trying
the
to hide.
military or he had been in
In
the
the
military where
military,
like
they teach them how to hide matches on in their uniform.
yeah, so he got caught like doing that or something. So like,
Yeah.
we don't have an answer to the beef jerky, but at this point I
Makes
don't know
sense
that I'd
too
be
in the military, especially when you look at like back in history what those men who stormed the beaches in Normandy would have had to do. You want to be able to start a fire if you're in the middle of a field somewhere.
yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because we have the beef. There's, to my knowledge, only two instances of people being accused of sneaking food in. Because there's the beef jerky that leads to Kel getting voted out, whether he had it or not, the world may never actually know besides him. But
Amazon.
what?
And Amazon.
Yeah, I was gonna say Amazon because I've started rewatching Amazon last week and I've only watched 2 episodes. But in the second episode, it's raining, so the women's tribe puts all their stuff into this container so it doesn't get drenched. And once they pull all their stuff back out, there's a granola bar wrapper in the bottom of it.
Yeah.
And we very clearly saw that one was there. It's not like the beef jerky of 50-50. Was
That
it
one we
actually
saw.
there or not?
What I've heard later about it, and I think this is a good explanation from other players, both on that season but also on other seasons, is they say they're out there doing such a difficult job in such extreme circumstances that the camera crew isn't afraid to like have a granola bar or some chocolate in their pocket while they're filming.
And the wrapper just got in with everyone's stuff?
Basically,
That
it
makes
might have
sense.
just fallen out.
Before we move into a line blindside first boot, do you have any other moment? Well, not a moment, storyline we have to address. The Jerri Colby rivalry that lasts
Yeah,
across 3 seasons
let's
starts here.
address that. That's what I would say is the perfect way to place to move in.
Yeah, the two of them. We've talked about how Amanda and James were like the only pair that were alliances and close and played together on all 3 seasons. Colby and Jerri are kind of the inverse of that. They're pretty much rivals and on opposite sides of votes. Australian Outback, All Stars, and Heroes versus Villains. Both of their entire Survivor careers were with the other one there. And they, yeah. So, one of the iconic rivalries in the history of the show, probably the iconic rivalry in the history of the show, because it's the only one with that sort of longevity. But I could, and we talked about it a little bit earlier in the cast, but I felt the need to address the rivalry storyline there. Moving into.
Before we go to a line blindside first boot, I want to wrap it up with one question that just popped in my mind for you.
Yeah.
Since we're doing a season recap, final two is Tina and Colby. Who do you vote for?
Tina.
And why?
Like I said earlier, I think the two of them were a great duo. And like his game is the one everyone saw, and his was the flashy one, but and maybe this is having seen the season and seeing the confessionals that I wouldn't have seen if I was out there. But based on what I know, I feel like she was the one pulling the strings. I feel like, and he did a lot, don't get me wrong, but I definitely feel like he was kind of the original meat shield in a way.
Answer this with the following. At final three, I'm saying Colby gets my vote. At final two, Tina gets my vote, and it's because Colby threw the game away.
But if it had been a final three, Keith definitely wins in a unanimous jury vote, right?
Keith would be the original 0 vote finalist.
I don't. I've watched through the season twice, and I still don't get why nobody seemed to like him, or why it was such a slam dunk that anyone that sits at the end next to Keith beats. He doesn't seem that bad, other than being a gourmet chef that struggled to cook rice. Keith doesn't seem that bad. I don't get all the disdain for him.
I'm almost going to an Edge of Extinction reference with this, and I get the sense that he was just a passenger in Tina and Colby's plane.
Oh gosh, we're back with. I see. I love the metaphors now, but like when I was watching Edge of Extinction live, keep in mind that was like the third season I watched. I was so done with the passengers and pilots all season.
Yeah.
Although the line someone, and I believe it's Julia Carter, says at Tribal of "You're such a passenger, Rick," is his. That just makes me laugh for some reason. Like the metaphor is just became meta in that moment and became a thing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't agree. He seems fine, but I mean, him and Jerri butted heads, but other than Amber, everyone in Jerri butted heads. So moving into a line blindside first boot. Do you want to go first or do you want me to?
Let's go with I'm trying to put we talked about Jerry and that people found her annoying and therefore um kind of created her into a villainess. I'm gonna give you three other players in that role.
Okay.
So your choices are Abby Maria, Philippines, Nora Salmon, Island of the Idols, and Angelina Keeley, David versus Goliath.
I Abby's my favorite of this group, but she's so unpredictable. And like she seems super nice in real life. In the game, I don't think I could work with her because like we saw her and RC were super tight. And all Pete had to do was plant one idea in Abby's head and she believed it and completely flipped on RC hard. And I don't want to risk that. So I'm not gonna align with Abby. I'll probably first boot her as much as that hurts, just because having less elements in the game that I can't control, the better. I'll. I was about to say align with Angelina because it's proven that I can get to the end with her. She's been to the end, but so has Nora. So I think I will still align with Angelina and blindside Nora.
Yes. I think I'm also gonna align with Angelina, but I'll flip Nora and Abby in this case.
Nice. So your three are from our season that we've been recapping. You've got three people that were fun on the season. Well, never mind. I'm just going to give you three names. I don't really have an explanation for them. Two of the three were fun on the season but didn't get a ton of airtime. And the third one's Keith. So you've got Keith Famey, Amber Burkich, and Alicia Calloway.
Interesting. I'm going to align with Amber, seeing we're talking about Australia here.
Yeah,
So this is a player that has not at this point at least won the game.
agreed.
I'm gonna blindside Keith and first boot Alicia, mostly because I think Alicia might be the most bitter on the jury. I think Keith would be the least bitter on the jury.
Alicia's proven she, and of course, Alicia has proven she will be bitter as a juror.
Yeah.
Rob could have handled that better. I could say that about pretty much everyone he voted out that season. But if Rob plays the game now that he played in All Stars, the jury's not near as bitter as they were. People don't take things as personal anymore. The whole "it's a game" sentiment has really taken over, and I'm kind of glad for that. But also, I miss I miss the storylines of something like a Robin Lex. You know, we don't have that anymore. As for me, I agree because this is Australian Outback Amber. This isn't Amber over the course of her career. I'll align with her because, like Mom said, she's an observer but isn't an instigator. So she can read the game, and me and her can kind of figure out what to do. Because we see it on All Star. She reads things really well, and that can be helpful. And then hopefully I can beat her at the end. The only time she's made it to the end, she won, but that hasn't happened yet. So the other two, I agree. I'm gonna blindside Keith and first boot Alicia, but also because if we let Alicia get to the merge, what's gonna stop her from just beasting out in the individual immunity challenges?
Exactly. Good point. I didn't even think of that.
So those are my answers. This was a really fun long episode, but really fun episode.
Yeah, it was great. And like we say, it's one of both of I think like top 10 seasons of all time.
Yeah.
So it was great to talk about it.
And see, when we did our imagine if we had not been on free Zoom and had the 40-minute timer when we did our All Stars episode, we'd still be talking. But it's fun to be
Yeah.
able to go long like this sometimes. So this was fun. We've got really fun episodes planned for you guys this off season. And without further ado, grab your torches and head back to camp. Bye, guys.
Bruce, before you go,
Yeah, what's up?
yeah, I just gotta say one thing because I want to know: have I convinced you to watch some Euro 24 coming up?
Is that a soccer thing?
Yeah, it starts tomorrow. Second biggest tournament in the world.
I feel like the fact that I had no idea what that was should give you the answer. I follow soccer now because St. Louis has an MLS team, Go City. But the only league I follow is MLS, and all their games are on Apple TV Plus, and I refuse to pay for another streaming service just for soccer. So I really don't watch a ton
But
of it.
either way, to the audience, if you follow my personal page on Instagram, I apologize. It's about to be an England heavy page. It's coming home.
Well, go Team USA in cricket that beat the world powerhouse. So go them. I know nothing about cricket other than that it looks really interesting to watch because the bat's really weirdly shaped. But USA, that cricket's not a thing down here at all. But apparently our team just took out the powerhouse of the world in cricket. So good for them.
Grab your coaches and head back to camp.
Bye, guys.